They put his hands behind his back at 6:47 on a Thursday evening, on the corner of Halsted Street and 43rd in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, while a city bus groaned past and nobody on it turned to look. He had been standing outside the Bronzeville Community Credit Union, with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a set of keys in his right hand. The bag was navy blue, faded at the strap, where years of carrying had worn the nylon down to a lighter shade of itself. His jacket was charcoal wool, too warm for early September, but worn because he had come from a meeting and the meeting had required it. His shoes were plain black, regulation flat, the kind that come from a habit of choosing footwear for standing rather than being seen. He had been waiting for a car that was 3 minutes late. The two officers arrived on foot from the direction of the parking lot. The first one, young, wide in the shoulders, name tag that would later read Briggs, T. When the incident report was filed, put his hand on the man's arm before he said a word. The second one flanked the other side. Sir, we got a call. Somebody matching your description broke into a vehicle in this lot. The man looked at the hand on his arm. He looked at the officer's face. I didn't break into anything, he said. His voice was level, the way voices are level when they have been trained to stay level in conditions much louder than this. We need you to come with us while we verify. I can show you my identification. You can do that at the station. There was a woman in a green coat standing 8 feet away near the credit union door, and she did not move. There was a teenager on a bicycle who stopped pedaling and put one foot down on the pavement and watched. There was a man in a black apron outside the restaurant across the street who stepped one step outside, looked, and went back in. Officer Briggs T. put both hands on the man's shoulders and turned him toward the patrol car. The man said nothing. He did not resist. He did not raise his voice. He let himself be placed into the back seat of the car with the quiet compliance of someone who understood that the cost of the alternative was higher than the cost of the indignity, and who had made that calculation in the same half-second it took the officer to reach for him. What none of them saw, not Briggs, not his partner, not the woman in the green coat, not the teenager on the bicycle, was the black car that had been idling at the curb 40 feet behind the patrol vehicle. It had been there for 4 minutes. The driver had seen everything from the moment it started. And the person in the back seat of that black car had already opened the door and placed one foot on the pavement before the patrol car's rear door closed. His name was Rear Admiral Quadwo Asiedu Mensah. He was 61 years old and had been in the United States Navy for 36 years, and had for the last 4 of those years held a rank that placed him above every enlisted officer, every non-commissioned officer, every commissioned officer, and every captain in the 7th Naval District, and a good portion of the 8th. It was 5 feet 11 inches, which was a full inch shorter than he appeared because of the particular way he had learned to occupy space. Chin level, shoulder set, the bearing of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the first thing people assessed was whether you belonged there. He was wearing his uniform, not his dress. Whites, not his service dress blues with the gold stripes and the star above the braid. He was wearing his working khakis, which had his name on the right chest and his rank insignia on the collar, and which, in any branch of the United States military, communicated exactly and without ambiguity who you were dealing with. It had come to Bronzeville because the man in the back of the patrol car was Tobena Okafor, 54 years old, civilian contractor with the naval station Great Lakes, one of 3 financial architects who had spent the last 22 months restructuring a $340 million procurement allocation that the Admiral's office oversaw. He had been in Chicago for 4 days for a final review meeting. The Admiral had given him a lift from the meeting because Tobena's rental car had been delayed at O'Hare, and the Admiral was going the same direction. They had stopped at the credit union because Tobena needed to collect something from a safe deposit box, and the Admiral had waited in the car while he went inside. Tobena had been outside less than 7 minutes when the officers arrived. Tobena Okafor was the kind of man who was invisible until he spoke. He was medium height, 173 centimeters, with close-cut hair going silver at the temples and the hands of someone who had done physical work at some point in his life and never entirely shed the evidence of it. It smelled of cedar and the faint chemical trace of photocopier toner because he had spent most of the last 4 days inside a federal conference room with a stack of printed documents 3 inches thick. He carried a black pilot pen in his left breast pocket. at all times. Not because he needed to write things down constantly, but because he had learned, at some point in his career, that the person without a pen in a meeting is the person who borrows one, and borrowing is a small vulnerability he had trained himself out of. The canvas bag over his shoulder contained a laptop, two folders of printed documents stamped with Naval Station letterhead, a travel-worn Igbo Bible his mother had given him in 1996 when he left Enugu, and a tin of Wilson's tea bags, because he did not trust whatever was in the hotel room and had not trusted it since 2009 when a conference in Phoenix had produced something described as tea that had clearly never seen a tea leaf. It had come from very little, not in the way the phrase is usually meant as a shorthand for difficulty, but in the literal accounting sense. The house in Enugu had two rooms, a zinc roof that announced every rainstorm before it arrived, and a kerosene lamp his mother rationed with the precision of a bookkeeper because the month end was always further away than the money. His father had died when Tovena was 11. His mother had sold Puff Puff and groundnut oil from a folding table outside the motor park for the next 12 years to keep him and his younger sister in school. She had done this without complaint and without martyrdom, just with the quiet efficiency of someone who had made a decision and was implementing it one morning at a time. Tovena had graduated top of his economics faculty at the University of Nigeria in 1993. He had a gift for systems, not for the theory of them, but for the moment when a system's numbers revealed something the system's designers had not intended to reveal. It could look at a procurement spreadsheet the way other people looked at a sentence, reading not just what the numbers said, but what they were trying not to say. His supervisor at the contracting firm had once told him, only half joking, that Tobena could find a misaligned decimal point in a 4,000-line budget, the way a dog finds a bone buried 2 yards underground. It was not a compliment that Tobena ever repeated, but he understood what was being recognized. His goal for this week in Chicago was narrow and clear: close the review, sign off on the final allocation structure, and take the 7:40 p.m. flight back to Norfolk on Friday night, where his wife Nosy and their two daughters were waiting with a pot of ofako that she had already begun cooking that morning, because the smell of it was the specific thing he had asked for. The moment he walked in the door, that was the entire scope of his ambition for the week: a completed report and palm oil soup on a Friday night. The smallness of it, held against the size of the obstacle this Thursday evening had just placed in front of it, was something he had trained himself not to dwell on. Dwelling was a luxury. It could not afford it, and had never been able to afford it, and had over 54 years become remarkably good at walking forward anyway. Admiral Asiedu Mensah walked toward the patrol car at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow. It was the pace of a man who has spent enough time in authority to understand that running signals panic, and that panic is never the message you want to send first. Officer Briggs T. had his hand on the roof of the patrol car and was speaking into his radio when he saw the Admiral coming. He registered the uniform before he registered the face. His hand came off the roof. He registered the rank insignia. His radio stopped mid-transmission. The Admiral stopped 3 feet from the officer. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach into a pocket. He looked at Briggs with an expression that carried no anger in it. Only attention, precise and unbroken. The kind of attention that has learned to arrive before words do. That man, the Admiral said, is my colleague. He works for the federal government. He has not broken into anything. He was waiting for me. Briggs opened his mouth. He closed it. Open the door, the Admiral said. What happened in the 3 seconds after that sentence was not drama. It was physics. A force had entered the scene, and the scene reorganized around it. Briggs' partner, who had been leaning against the back quarter panel with his arms crossed, unfolded his arms and stood straight. Briggs reached for the door handle. The door opened. Tovena Okafor stepped out of the back of the patrol car and stood on the sidewalk in his charcoal jacket with his canvas bag still on his shoulder, because they had not taken it from him. Andhei straightened his collar with one hand and said nothing at all. The teenager on the bicycle was still there. The woman in the green coat was still there. The bus had long gone. If you can feel where this is going, stay with me, because what the Admiral does next is not what the officers expected, and it is not what most people would have done. He did not leave. He looked at Briggs. He looked at the partner whose name tag read Caruso, D. She looked at the patrol car and the radio still crackling softly, and the evening light starting to flatten out over Halstead Street. "What was the call?" he said. Briggs found his voice. "Anonymous tip, a black male, dark jacket, matching the description of someone who smashed a window in the parking lot adjacent." "When was the window smashed?" A pause. "Approximately 7:10 p.m., sir." The Admiral let that sit for a moment. He looked at his watch. "It is 6:52. Another pause. "Longer this time. My colleague has been inside that credit union since 6:39. I can show you the time-stamped text message he sent me when he went in." The event you're describing had not yet occurred when he was already inside that building. He paused. "The description you received was a black man in a dark jacket in this neighborhood. That description," he said quietly, "was always going to produce this result." Briggs sighed nothing. His partner sighed nothing. The radio crackled. "I'm not interested in filing a complaint tonight," the Admiral said. "I am interested in the two of you understanding something before you go back to your precinct." He looked at Briggs directly. "You are 26 years old. I don't know you, but I know this job, and I know what it does to the way you see people if you are not careful with yourself. What you did just now was not policing. It was a shortcut. A black man standing outside a building in the early evening became a call about a broken window that had not yet happened. You connected those two things because connecting them was faster than seeing them clearly." Briggs' jaw was tight. His eyes were on the Admiral's collar insignia, the silver star and the stripe, in the way eyes move to something they are not sure is real. "Go find whoever actually broke that window," the Admiral said. "That is your job tonight." He turned and walked back toward the black car. Tobena fell into step beside him without a word. They had walked together in enough buildings, down enough corridors for the stride to be familiar. They reached the car. The driver, a Navy petty officer named Quarte, who had been watching through the front windshield with his hands very still on the wheel, exhaled once and started the engine. Tobena got in first. The Admiral got in behind him. The door closed. Neither of them spoke for approximately 90 seconds as the car moved down Halstead. The city passed on both sides. The barber shop with the poles still spinning. The late open bodega with its hand-lettered sign in the window. The light changing at the intersection, and the brief pause of traffic in the amber. Petty Officer Corte drove without speaking. He had been the Admiral's driver for 2.5 years, and had learned early that the silences after certain kinds of events were not silences that needed filling. Then Tobena said, without turning his head, "That is the third time in 4 days." The Admiral said, "I know." Tobena said, "The first time was at the hotel, the elevator. A woman stepped back when I got in and stood against the wall until the doors opened, and then she got off on the second floor even though she had pressed 7. He paused. "The second time was outside the federal building on Tuesday morning. The security guard made me empty my bag completely. Not the scanner. The bag itself, on the table, in the lobby in front of 12 people waiting in line. He did not ask the men ahead of me to do that." "I know," the Admiral said again. "He had a different color bag," Tobena said. "That is the only variable I can identify." I cite this without bitterness. Not because there was no bitterness. There was. He was 54 years old and had been carrying bitterness at this particular temperature for most of his adult life. But because he had long since separated the temperature of the bitterness from the usefulness of expressing it. The expression was a cost. He had learned to account for it the way he accounted for everything else. The Admiral was looking out the window at the neighborhood moving past. "How are you?" he said. Tobena was quiet for a moment. "I'm fine," he said, in the specific way a person says they are fine when the accurate answer would take longer than the car ride and would require the listener to do something with what they heard. And the person saying it has not yet decided what they want the listener to do. The Admiral nodded. He did not push further. He understood this particular answer in the way that comes from having given it yourself many times, over many years, in many uniforms, in many rooms where you were the only person who looked like you and were expected to remain grateful for the privilege of being there. He had given that answer in 1994 at a promotion board where the senior officer had asked him, in front of 4 other people, whether he thought his culture had prepared him well enough for command. He had given it in 2007 after a flag officers' dinner where another admiral had put his hand on Quadro's shoulder and said, "You're one of the good ones," with a warmth so sincere that The cruelty of it had taken 3 days to fully arrive. He had given it last March when his daughter called from her university in Atlanta and told him about what a professor had said in front of her seminar. And he'd listened to her voice, doing the same work his voice was doing now, holding the shape of a composed person. And he had said, I know, and I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry, in that order. Because that was the order that was true. I'm fine, Tovena had said. And so the car moved on. Now there is something about Tovena Okafor that this story has not yet told you. And it is the piece that changes the weight of everything that has already happened. 23 years ago, in the fall of 2003, Kwadwo Asiedu Mensah was a lieutenant commander in the Navy stationed at Naval Station Norfolk. He was 38 years old. He had a wife, Nana, and a son who was 7, and an application pending for a competitive fellowship that would accelerate his path to command. It was running along the waterfront at 5:40 in the morning when he stepped wrong on a section of uneven boardwalk, went over the railing and into the water. The Chesapeake in late October is 58 degrees Fahrenheit. At 58 degrees, the average person loses coordinated muscle control in under 10 minutes. Kwadwo was in uniform, not his workout clothes, but his working khakis, which he had been wearing because the run had been a detour on his way in. He went under twice before he came back up. The man who pulled him out was a 31-year-old civilian maintenance contractor who had been on the dock since 4:45 a.m. repairing a section of the boardwalk railing, the same section that had given way. He used a 30-foot extension cord wrapped 3 times around his own arm to reach the water. He had a cut on his palm that would require 11 stitches and a bruised shoulder that he would not get looked at for 6 days because he did not have health insurance. His name was Tovena Okafor. He had been in the United States for 8 months at that point, having come from Enugu on a work authorization that was tied to the contractor company. He had a degree in financial systems from the University of Nigeria and a visa category that did not allow him to apply for work in his field. He was repairing boardwalks because it was what was available and because he had a wife at home and a younger sister who needed school fees, and because a paycheck is a paycheck regardless of what you have to do to earn it. The Admiral, then Lieutenant Commander Asiedu Mensah, had never forgotten the man's name. He had written a letter to the contractor company that same week. He had made 3 phone calls over the following 6 months. He had spoken to a colleague in procurement who knew someone at a naval contracting firm. Doors had opened. Slowly, the way doors open when someone with access chooses to use it on another person's behalf rather than their own. Tovena had gone back to school at 41. To complete the certifications his Enugu degree didn't automatically transfer to. He had started as a junior financial analyst at the contracting firm at 43. He had been a senior analyst at 48, a lead financial architect at 51, and had been sitting across the table from a rare Admiral at a $340 million procurement review at 54, still with the scar on his palm from the extension cord. Still not mentioning it, still doing the work. He had never told the Admiral that he remembered the railing giving way before the fall. He had never said so because Kwadwo had never asked. And because there are things you carry between 2 people that don't need to become a conversation to be real. The car stopped outside the hotel on South Michigan Avenue. Tovena picked up his canvas bag. He opened the door and got out. He leaned back in through the window. The review is at 9 o'clock tomorrow, he said. I know, the Admiral said. I'll see you there. Tovena straightened up. He walked toward the hotel entrance. He did not look back. He did not need to. By 8:30 the following morning, before the review began, the Admiral's aide, a lieutenant junior grade named Adeyemi, had placed 2 phone calls. The first was to the 21st District Precinct Commander at the Chicago Police Department. The second was to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Contact the Admiral maintained for situations that warranted documentation rather than discretion. It did not file a formal complaint. He requested a meeting. He specified that the meeting was to include a review of stop and identify incidents in Bronzeville between January and August of that year, filtered by the demographic data the precinct was already required to track. The meeting happened on the following Tuesday. It lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. The precinct commander brought his deputy and 2 senior watch commanders. The Admiral brought his aide and a printed summary he had compiled himself on Saturday afternoon. The summary ran to 11 pages. It covered 6 precincts, 14 months of incident data, and 3 specific patterns that the Admiral described in the meeting as the difference between officers doing their job and officers doing the job their bias had already done for them. He was not angry in the meeting. He was precise. He used the word systemic once, very early, and spent the rest of the meeting replacing it with numbers. At the end of the meeting, the precinct commander said, "What do you want from us, Admiral?" The Admiral said, "I want your officers to see the person before they see the description." A retraining program was designed over the following 6 weeks, in partnership with the precinct, the Department of Justice, Contact, and a civilian consultant who had spent 20 years studying how law enforcement cognition works under time pressure. It was rolled out to 4 precincts in the first round. The module on description-based stops was written in part from a scenario the Admiral had described in the Tuesday meeting. A man standing outside a credit union in a dark jacket at 6:47 in the evening, waiting for a car that was 3 minutes late. Officer Briggs T. completed the training in the second cohort. He did not know where the scenario had come from. He recognized it anyway. What happened on the corner of Halsted and 43rd on a Thursday evening was not an extraordinary event. That is the exact point. It was a Thursday. It was a man waiting for a car. It was a call that came in about a window that had not yet been broken, matched to a description that fit 10,000 people on that street at that hour, applied to the first one the officer saw. It was ordinary. That is what made it what it was. You cannot always put a rear admiral in the car behind you. Most people do not have one. Most people who are taken by the arms on a Thursday evening and placed in the back of a patrol car do not have someone who will step out of a black car, 40 feet away, and say the words that make the door open again. Most people go to the station. Most people make the phone call. Most people come home 4 hours later and sit at the kitchen table and try to explain to someone who loves them what it felt like to be right and have it cost you the whole evening anyway. You can take a man's Thursday evening. You can take his dignity in front of a teenager on a bicycle and a woman in a green coat. You can process him through a system that was not designed to see him and call it procedure. But you cannot take what he is. You cannot pull rank out of a man. You cannot arrest a person's record. Their sacrifice, their 36 years, their 22 months of work on a document that will protect the integrity of $340 million in public funds. You cannot put that in the back of a patrol car. Some people in authority use their power to protect themselves. Some use it to prove a point. Some woozy to close the door behind them and keep it closed. What the Admiral did that evening, and on the Tuesday after it, was none of those things. He used what he had, quietly, to make the next person's Thursday evening slightly less likely to end in the back of a patrol car. Not because it would be noticed. Not because it would be attributed to him. Because Tovena Okafor had once wrapped an extension cord around his arm and gone to the edge of a dock. And because some debts are not discharged with a letter and a phone call. Some debts are discharged with the rest of your life. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. If you had spent 36 years serving a country, and that country's systems still could not see you clearly when you were standing on a street corner in a wool jacket waiting for a car, would you keep serving? And if your answer is yes, I want you to consider what that costs a person. Not in years. In the specific kind of tiredness that has no name in most languages, and that the people who carry it have learned not to mention in rooms where mentioning it would be taken as ingratitude. Leave your answer in the comments. I mean it. If this is where you come for stories about quiet power, about the people who carry more than the world gives them credit for, and about the dignity that no system has ever successfully processed, subscribe. There are more stories coming. I'll see you in the next one.